I feel extremely glad and also honored to speak along with Glenn on this issue. And I'm very happy to be back in the UK after 20 years. and yes, I studied in Bradford briefly for a few years, and I took my position as teaching peace studies. But at the same time, I spent lots of time training activists and school teachers to do peace training, peace education for young people. The young people are very important for the transformation of South Korea and Korea as movement always pays great attention for the formation of young activists. Today I'm going to briefly add a few points to Glyn's input. Personally, I come from a very interesting family background. Both of my parents are former North Koreans. They came to South as refugees, war refugees in 1950s, as a teenager and as a young person. I was born in South Korea, of course, raised in South Korea, but all my relatives, whenever there is kind of equivalent to Thanksgiving Day or New Year's Day, 90% of my relatives are from former North Koreans, and they will speak very strong North Korean dialect, which will surprise me, which I never hear in my schools and surrounding. And I slowly realized how these ex-North Koreans were looked down in South Korea, and they had to live in a concentrated, like a semi-ghetto places in different towns. So that experience was quite different. And I also learned that many of these ex-Koreans, ex-North Koreans living in South Korea, they develop very deep-rooted hatred and antagonism towards North Korea. North Korea being taken over by communists, and that's why they're expelled in South. And South Korea, they were not very much welcomed at the beginning. So this kind of, nomadic, expelled perception developed among these people. So I grew up in that background. And so the inter-Korea relationship was always very sensitive to me from the beginning. And these relatives, they will always tell stories about their hometown in North Korea. Then only through historical materials, then later I found out that the foundation of North Korea and South Korea were quite different. There was not only war. If you remember the Korean War in 1950s, which wiped out more than something like 15% of the population in less than 3 years. And North Koreans until today, senior North Koreans, still today have a very strong memory of the American Air Force's bombing, carpet bombing style. So all the major cities, including Pyongyang, they were cleanly destroyed, and probably they put more bombs in North Korea than in Europe of the Second World War. So they still have this vivid memory. And they remember the foundation of North Korea as an armed struggle against Japanese colonial period. So I read these letters of my relatives in North Korea through an American, my relative in the US who has American citizenship. So she can visit North Korea and come back to South Korea and show us the letters from my relatives whom I have never seen. And in the letters, the strong memory of the bombing of the war, and very proud that their country is established with a different background than South Korea, that these founders of the country were fighting against Japanese colonial rulers. They were very proud of that. And they were pointing fingers at those ex-North Koreans in South, you puppets, you traitors, living in South Korea. So that finger was actually pointed at me in the family. So this is part of, what I'm trying to say is that personally and also politically, the 70 years of division between North and South Korea has lots of stories that are not well known to outside. The war, which wiped out 15% of population, more than 10 million of families divided across the borders, no communication, no letters, no radios, no news for 70 years, total division, and political system very authoritarian in North, and also long dictatorship, military dictatorship in the South. I was born in 1960, then there was a military coup by General Park, who was a loyal military officer to Japanese emperor before. And there was a military coup in 1961, and generals ruled the country in the South until 1987. So my entire youth period until I was 27 years old was under generals who either served Japan or for the US. And schools were run like military camps, and we were given like military style uniforms, and we had to salute to seniors and to teachers in the military. So it was almost like Nazi Jugend style schooling and culture. And we had to memorize all this loyalty oath to the president, to the dictator. That was the division for us. On top of that, there was military spending, which exhausts your national capability in North and South Korea. On top of that, all the males have to serve in the army. In North Korea, they have to serve for 7 years. In South Korea, until today, they have to serve for 20 months, every young man. And legally, we are still at war. The Korean War was not concluded. So the culture is militarized, the school is militarized, the politics is militarized, economics is militarized, and politically, internationally, the very heavy dependency on the US in terms of politics and in terms of military presence in the South Korea. And did you know that the US actually placed like 1,000 tactical nuclear weapons in South Korean soil until late 1980s? Did you know that? So there was first the nuclear weapons by the US in the South, which triggered the nuclear weapons program in North Korea, and then the crisis came. So I would like to highlight that 70 years is something very, very extraordinary, exhausting all human and economic and political resources. And I'd like to highlight the recent changes. So PSPD, my organization, is a combination of watchdog and campaign and alternative policy think tank and coalition building. These are four main areas we focus. So when there is issue, something like corruption of the president, Miss Park, the daughter of the former dictator, corruption and not functioning as a president and using her friends as her sovereign representatives, like that. So when this kind of issue comes on, PSPD takes the role of a large coalition building. So we talk to NGOs and social movements and trade union groups of different political orientations that, hey, look, this is our main agenda, probably for three or 4 years. So can we build a coalition of 200 or 300 or 400 NGOs together? Can we mobilize? We can mobilize lots of people only if we can have that kind of coalition building. So we take this kind of initiative, try to strategize and try to find a set of common agenda. And when that coalition building becomes successful, and we were successful in 1916, we were able to, the whole coalition was able to, not PSPD, but the whole coalition was able to mobilize millions of demonstrators among all major cities in South Korea for 5 months, almost every day or every weekend for 5 months over the winter period. And our winter is much harsher than the winter in London. Sometimes it gets minus 20 Celsius. So for demonstration, you have to wear 3 layers of underclothes down here and 4 layers here, cover your mouth and so forth. So we demonstrated peacefully, mostly non-violently, for about 5 months, and the president was impeached in the parliament first, and then impeachment was substantiated by a Constitutional Court in 2017. And then a new presidential election was called. And now we have Moon's government, which is more democratic than all other previous governments, in my view. So now, when Moon takes in the job with a strong support from this people's movement and large coalition of civic groups, one of the first things he announces is rapprochement policy towards North Korea. Because in the Korean context, that's what differentiates Democrats from conservatives. Conservatives stick to Cold War politics, and Democrats' new policies, rapprochement, peace process. So he announces this new policy in 2017. But Kim Jong-un was continuing with the missile launch test, 3 times ICBM test in that year. And then at the end of the year, we saw a nuclear bomber from Guam, American nuclear bomber from Guam, flying straight to Pyongyang, cross just over the borderline and come back. It was almost a war. That was 2017. Now, South Korean government takes initiative of proposing more active proposals to North Korea with the event of Pyeongchang Winter Olympics happening in South Korea. So very active invitation of North Korean teams to participate. The 1st of January 2018, Kim Jong-un responds very favorably for this call. So with these two announcements from the top of the 2 Koreas, a new process begins. So 2018 is a very, very special year for us, for Korea. And we have to remember that what happened in 2017, 3 ICBM launches and a brink of war happening from Washington's war strategy. Now, what has happened? There are strong agreement between Pyongyang and Seoul. It's about peace regime, it's about peace treaty, it's about ending the war, and it's about military trust building, it's about economic cooperation, it's about exchange of people. They agreed all these terms in April 27th of 2018. What happened? The generals met several times. The railroad people met several times. Our investigation team traveled around North Korea to study railway conditions. Now there is a blueprint of reconstruction of railways and roads and energy cooperation between North and South. They are all plans. There have been hundreds of meetings from minister level to technical levels in less than 2 years. And anybody who visits this borderline between North Korea and South Korea, it's called the demilitarized zone, but it used to be the highest militarized zone in the world. So one of the agreement was to remove all hostilities on the borderlines. And they shut down 20 very important military guarding posts. And they opened up some of the borderlines for road connections and other connections. And they are shaking hands. They're exchanging jokes. These are soldiers and these generals who are pointing guns at each other. They're exchanging jokes. They are exchanging smiles. And they are talking on new terms. This is a sea change after 70 years. So at this point, I'd like to highlight and appeal to you that for the lives and for the future of the people living in that land, Korean Peninsula, any kind of bad peace negotiation is much better than war possibilities. And we have achieved that. And it's not just government change of policy. It's a long accumulated people's strife to have a democracy and transparent government which can change its stance against North Korea. And the third point I'd like to make is that I cannot substantiate with hard evidences yet, but many of the observations from South Korea is that there are also new changes happening in North Korea. First, When Kim Jong-un came into power, there was a significant change in the constitution in North Korea. They dropped all terminologies of communism. So North Korean constitution is no more communist constitution. They dropped all communist language in the constitution. They changed textbooks from ideological textbooks into normal textbooks. Kim Jong-un is pushing for educational reforms up to global standards. And he's also calling for administrative and social welfare services up to the demands of people. And he's pushing for more autonomy for individual factories and economic units. And he's creating special economic zone in every province, 9 provinces. And one of the first demands from North Korea to South Korea was cooperation with these special economic zones in every province. Before Kim Jong-un, it was one-man rule. With Kim Jong-un, he's institutionalizing decision-making processes. So the administration is decided by administrative bodies, military affairs are decided by military bodies. And so he's institutionalizing politics. Before Kim Jong-un, it was army first and politics later. So the military forces were actually running the state in North Korea. Now with Kim Jong-un, it's Communist Party, North Korea's Workers' Party, who is running the state. In the history of North Korea, this is a sea change. It is still authoritarian. Kim Jong-un is still top leader, and there is this called almost godly worshipping of the leaders. Yes, there's a continuity, but at the same time, there is institutional changes. And we in South Korea, at least people who support rapprochement, we take these changes very, very substantial. So my second appeal to you is that please recognize that these changes are very important changes, and these have probably very long-term impact. Okay? There was a 70-year unresolved war in that corner of the world when US, Russia, and China all involved before. Now this unresolved conflict is being unpacked and being healed and addressed by peaceful means, peaceful diplomacy, which is backed up by people's movement. This is a very exceptional case and possibly very optimistic messages. So that's my appeal to you, that this change is probably far-reaching, and it is probably have more peace messages than any other cases we see recently. And one little more issue, maybe this is a different information to gleans. In one of the first meetings with President Moon and Kim Jong-un, there was a verbal agreement that North Korea is ready to accept continuity of US forces even after ending the war situation. So we take that message from Kim Jong-un as recognizing that removal of the US forces becoming an agenda of the negotiation will be too sensitive. So we understand that North Korea is concerned about exchange of security guarantee and dismantling of nuclear weapons program. And they want to remove the US forces issue out of the equation. So that's how we interpret in South Korea. I'd like to summarize. Number one, there's one more point, but I will summarize anyway. The peace negotiation between North Korea and South Korea means something, so I'd like you to understand and recognize that fact. And number three, even though there are disputes between Washington and North Korea, there's no other options. No other options. It's too militarized, that region. There are too many weapons. And if you count the standing and reserve military forces, North Korea has about probably 9 million, 2 million standing army and 7 million reserve army. And South Korea has 0.6 million standing army and more than 2 million reserve army. Combine the two, we have 10 million professional military forces. And in addition, we have US forces, nuclear capable US forces there. In addition, we have potentially nuclear power capable Japan, and we have China. So there is no other option than diplomatic solution on this case. Any trigger will be deadly. So that's my appeal to you. The dialogue between North Korea and the US has to resume. And number three, last point, is humanitarian. Because of the sanctions and because of internal problems, North Korea's economy is bad. Its individual income level and national economic output is very low. It's one of the poorest countries in terms of the individual income. And now food shortage is very serious. If you read UN documents, they expect 40% of the whole population to be under nourishment this year. They expect 20% of children will suffer chronic malnutrition this year. So at least we are, PSPD and other groups, humanitarian groups in South Korea, we are appealing to the UN and to the US international community that at least sanctions will be lifted so that medicines and food can reach North Korean people. It's quite serious. So please separate humanitarian issues with nuclear weapons issues. It's quite serious this year. Thank you. I will stop here.